Hi, I'm Natasha. I walked into that boardroom carrying my quarterly report, 3 months of flawless work summarized in neat charts and projections. But before I could even set it down, my millionaire boss looked right through me and said, "Let Amber handle the presentation. Real executives don't need coaching wheels." Before we dive back in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. And if this story hit home, hit that subscribe button. I've got something really special lined up for tomorrow. What he didn't know was that the woman he called a coaching wheel owned the patents to every product his company had launched in the past 5 years. And that was just the beginning. Before we dive in, what time is it where you are right now? And have you ever watched someone less qualified get credit for your work? Drop a comment and let's talk, because this story gets much, much worse. The chrome and glass tower of Pinnacle Dynamics stretched 43 floors into the Seattle skyline, and I'd been climbing those floors for 4 years, one promotion at a time. Marketing coordinator to senior analyst to project lead. Each step earned through late nights and weekend strategy sessions that no one else wanted to attend. My corner desk on the 37th floor wasn't much, a view of the neighboring building's brick wall and a computer that took 3 minutes to boot up, but it was mine. The quarterly reports I'd been preparing for the past 6 weeks were spread across every available surface, color-coded, cross-referenced, backed up on 3 different drives. This wasn't just work. This was my shot at the senior management track, the kind of position that came with real decision-making power and a salary that could finally pay off my student loans. The presentation was scheduled for 2 p.m. in Conference Room Atlas, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows and leather chairs that cost more than my monthly rent. I'd rehearsed my opening 17 times. I knew every data point, every projection, every potential question they might ask. The research had taken me deep into market analysis reports that most people in the company had never even heard of, and I'd found patterns that could save Pinnacle millions in the next fiscal year. At 1:45, I gathered my materials and headed down the hall. The conference room was already buzzing with voices, executives in tailored suits, department heads checking their phones, and at the center of it all, Harrison Blackstone, CEO, founder, the man who'd built Pinnacle from a garage startup into a billion-dollar empire. I'd only spoken to him twice in 4 years. Both times, he'd called me the hard-working one and moved on before I could respond with more than, "Thank you, sir." But today was different. Today, he'd see exactly how hardworking I really was. I stepped into the room and immediately felt the shift. Conversations paused, eyes turned, but not toward me, toward the woman walking in behind me. Amber Kingsley glided past me like I was furniture, her red-soled heels clicking against the marble floor with practiced confidence. Amber had been hired 6 months ago as senior strategic consultant, though nobody could quite explain what she consulted on. What we all knew was that she had Harrison's ear, his trust, and apparently his protection. She'd never stayed past 5 p.m., never attended a weekend planning session, and somehow always ended up presenting other people's work. "Harrison," she said warmly, settling into the chair directly to his right. "I'm so excited to share what we've discovered about Q4 projections." "We?" I blinked hard, gripping my folder tighter. Harrison smiled at her with the kind of warmth I'd never seen him show anyone else in the building. "Amber's been leading this analysis. Her insights have been invaluable." I cleared my throat softly. Actually, Mr. Blackstone, I've prepared—" "Let Amber handle the presentation," he interrupted, not even looking at me. "Real executives don't need coaching wheels." The words hit like ice water. I stood there, folder in hand, watching as Amber opened her laptop, the same laptop where I'd seen her scrolling through social media during our team meetings, and began presenting my research, my charts, my recommendations, my 3 months of nights and weekends. She spoke smoothly, confidently, like she'd lived with this data for months. And maybe she had, copied from the shared drive I'd uploaded it to just yesterday morning. When she got to the cost-saving projections, the ones that had taken me 2 weeks to calculate, she paused dramatically. "This could save us 2.3 million annually," she said, letting the number hang in the air. Harrison leaned forward, impressed. "Outstanding work, Amber. This is exactly the kind of strategic thinking that separates good employees from great ones." I felt something crack inside my chest. Not heartbreak, something harder, colder. I looked around the room. Department heads were nodding, taking notes. The CFO was already pulling out his phone, probably to start implementation. And there I stood, invisible, holding the original research that none of them would ever see. I didn't make a scene. I learned long ago that scenes only make you look unstable, unprofessional. Instead, I closed my folder, tucked it under my arm, and walked toward the door. "Natasha," Harrison called out just as I reached the handle. I turned back. "Make sure you get Amber anything she needs for the follow-up analysis. This is priority 1. I nodded once. "Of course, Mr. Blackstone." But as I walked out, something had shifted inside me. It wasn't anger. Anger burns hot and dies fast. This was something else. This was clarity. The elevator ride down to my floor felt longer than usual. When the doors opened, I walked past my desk and straight to the break room. I needed coffee, needed a moment to breathe, needed to figure out what came next. That's when I overheard them. 2 interns from accounting were huddled by the vending machine, speaking in low voices. "Did you see that presentation?" one of them whispered. "Amber literally copied everything from Natasha's shared folder. I saw her downloading the files yesterday." "Everyone knows," the other replied, "but nobody's going to say anything. You know how Harrison is about her." I poured my coffee slowly, keeping my back to them. They didn't know I was listening, didn't know I was even there. Just like in that boardroom, I was invisible. But invisible sometimes means people forget you have ears. That evening, I stayed late, not to work, to think. The office was nearly empty, just the cleaning crew and the hum of computers left running overnight. I sat at my desk, staring at the research folder that should have made my career. Then I remembered something. Last month, when I'd been digging into market analysis, I'd stumbled across some corporate filings that seemed odd. Patent registrations under shell companies, intellectual property transfers that didn't quite add up. I'd bookmarked them but never followed through. Now, I opened those files again. The first document was a patent filing from 3 years ago. Innovation in Automated Customer Relationship Management Systems. Applicant, N.L. Winters. That was my maiden name, the name I'd used when I first started developing software in college, before I got married, before I took my ex-husband's surname. I scrolled down to the co-applicant line, Pinnacle Dynamics, LLC. My heart started racing. I clicked deeper into the filing history. 5 more patents, all under N.L. Winters, all co-owned by Pinnacle. Software algorithms, user interface designs, data processing methods, innovations I'd created during my graduate program and licensed to small companies that had later been acquired by Pinnacle. I leaned back in my chair, the pieces falling into place like dominoes in reverse. 3 years ago, when Harrison had discovered my potential and hired me directly from a tiny tech startup, it hadn't been my resume that caught his attention. It had been my patents he'd acquired when he bought out my former employer. The woman he just humiliated owned the intellectual property that had generated 60% of his company's revenue. I pulled up the employee database and searched for my hiring records. There it was, buried in the legal attachments, an intellectual property transfer agreement. My patents had been rolled into my employment contract, assigned to Pinnacle in exchange for stock options that wouldn't vest for another 18 months. But there was something else, a clause I'd never noticed before, probably because I'd been so excited to finally land a corporate job that I'd signed without reading every line. In the event of patent dispute or creator challenge, original ownership reverts to inventor pending arbitration. I stared at that line for a long time. Then I opened a new browser window and started researching patent law. By midnight, I understood exactly what Harrison had done.
He'd identified promising patents from small companies, acquired those companies specifically for their intellectual property, then hired the inventors as regular employees to keep them close and compliant. It was brilliant, really. Why steal ideas when you can buy the people who create them? But he'd made one critical mistake. He'd assumed that once he owned the companies, he owned the patents permanently. Patent law doesn't work that way. Creators' rights, especially for employees who weren't initially hired as inventors, could be challenged under specific circumstances. And Harrison Blackstone had just given me those circumstances. When he humiliated me in front of the board, when he dismissed my work and handed it to Amber, when he called me coaching wheels, he'd created a hostile work environment for the person who legally owned the foundation of his empire. I didn't smile. Not yet. But something solid was forming in my chest. Something that felt like the opposite of invisible. I gathered my things slowly, turned off my computer, and walked toward the elevator. Tomorrow, I wouldn't be coming back as the same person who'd left that boardroom. Tomorrow, I'd be coming back as someone who finally understood the game. And more importantly, someone who knew how to win it. As I stepped into the elevator and watched the numbers count down to the parking garage, my phone buzzed. A text from Amber. "Thanks for all your help on the presentation today. Harrison was so impressed." I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back. "You're welcome. I hope you enjoyed it." Because what Amber didn't know, what Harrison didn't know, was that they just handed me everything I needed to take back what was mine. This one took us ages to get right, so if you're loving it, hitting subscribe would honestly mean the world to us. Okay, back to business. Last time, I was humiliated when my boss Harrison Blackstone dismissed me in front of the entire board, calling me coaching wheels while handing my presentation to his pet employee Amber. But what Harrison didn't know was that I owned the patents to every major product his company had launched.
Now here's what happened when I started digging deeper. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Harrison's voice. Real executives don't need coaching wheels. So at 2 a.m., I gave up trying and opened my laptop. I pulled up the patent database and started searching systematically. My maiden name, Natasha Lauren Winters, appeared on 17 different filings. 17. I'd completely forgotten about some of them. Late-night coding sessions in grad school, weekend hackathons where I'd solve problems just for fun. But what made my stomach drop was seeing Pinnacle Dynamics listed as co-owner on every single one. The first patent was dated 4 years ago, right around the time Harrison had discovered me at TechFlow Solutions, the tiny startup where I'd been working as a junior developer. He'd offered me triple my salary to join Pinnacle, and I'd been so grateful, so flattered that a company like his would want someone like me. I'd never questioned why he was so interested in a small-time developer from a company most people had never heard of. Now I knew. I spent the next 3 days doing something I should have done years ago, reading every document I'd ever signed with Pinnacle. The hiring agreement, the intellectual property transfer, the stock option plan, the non-disclosure agreements. Page after page of legal text I'd skimmed through because I'd trusted Harrison. Trusted the HR representative who'd assured me it was all standard paperwork. But buried in Section 12.3 of the employment contract was a clause that made my hands shake. In the event of hostile work environment or discriminatory treatment affecting patent holders' ability to perform duties, original intellectual property rights may be subject to legal review and potential reversion. I read it 5 times. Then I called the number at the bottom of the contract, Pinnacle's legal department. "This is Natasha Winters in marketing. I need to speak with someone about intellectual property clause interpretation." The paralegal who answered sounded bored until I mentioned Section 12.3. Then her tone shifted completely. "Hold on, let me transfer you to Rebecca Walsh. She handles IP disputes." Rebecca Walsh picked up on the second ring. Her voice was sharp, professional. "Miss Winters, I've been expecting this call for about 2 years." My heart stopped. "Expecting it?
Your patents generate approximately 60% of Pinnacle's current revenue stream. The CRM software, the data analytics platform, the mobile interface system, they're all built on your foundational code. When Harrison acquired TechFlow Solutions, he wasn't buying a company, he was buying you. Rebecca agreed to meet me that Saturday at a coffee shop in Capitol Hill, far from Pinnacle's downtown tower. She arrived carrying a thick manila folder and wearing the expression of someone who'd been waiting to have this conversation. "Harrison Blackstone has done this before," she said, sliding documents across the small table. TechFlow was the fourth company he'd acquired specifically for patent portfolios, but you're the first inventor he hired directly. I opened the folder. Inside were acquisition records, patent transfers, and employment contracts for other developers who'd worked at companies Pinnacle had bought. 3 of them had quit within 2 years, 2 had been laid off during restructuring, 1 had filed a lawsuit that was settled out of court with a non-disclosure agreement. "What happened to them?" I asked. "Once their non-compete clauses expired, they couldn't prove intellectual theft because they'd signed their rights away voluntarily. But your situation is different." Rebecca pointed to a highlighted section of my contract. "This clause was added specifically for you. Harrison's lawyers insisted on it." "Why?" "Because your patents were too valuable to risk losing in a standard acquisition. They needed a way to keep you compliant, but they also needed an escape clause in case something went wrong." She leaned forward. "Something like creating a hostile work environment." I stared at the papers. How hostile does it need to be? Discrimination, public humiliation, unfair treatment that affects your ability to do your job. Rebecca's eyes met mine. Sound familiar? That Monday, I started documenting everything. I set up a dedicated email account and began forwarding every interaction with Harrison and Amber. I started recording meetings on my phone. Washington is a one-party consent state, so perfectly legal as long as I was present. The patterns emerged quickly. In the weekly team meetings, Harrison would ask for my input, then immediately turn to Amber for strategic perspective on the same topic. When I'd submit reports, they'd be reviewed by Amber before going to upper management. When clients requested the technical lead on calls, Harrison would send Amber instead. "Natasha's busy with data entry," he'd tell them. Data entry. I had 2 engineering degrees and a master's in computer science. But the moment that changed everything happened on a Thursday afternoon. I was walking past Harrison's office when I heard voices through the partially open door. "The winter situation is getting complicated," Harrison was saying. "She's been asking questions about her employment contract." Amber's laugh was light, casual. "Can't you just reassign her to something less important? Maybe move her to customer service." "The patents complicate things," Harrison said. "Legal says we need to be careful about how we handle this." "What if she just left? People quit all the time." There was a pause. Then Harrison's voice, quieter. "That would solve several problems." I pressed myself against the wall, phone recording everything.
"I could make things more difficult for her," Amber continued. "Maybe she'll get the hint." "Just don't leave fingerprints," Harrison replied. I didn't confront them. Instead, I did something better. I started giving Amber exactly what she wanted, access to more of my work. I created a shared folder and began uploading incomplete projects, preliminary research, rough drafts of analysis reports. Then I waited. Within a week, Amber was presenting my unfinished work to clients, projections that were missing crucial data points, market analysis that hadn't been fact-checked, strategic recommendations based on incomplete research. And I documented every single presentation she gave using my flawed work. By Friday, clients were calling with questions, revenue projections that didn't add up, software recommendations that weren't compatible with their existing systems, marketing strategies based on outdated demographic data. Harrison called an emergency meeting for Monday morning. That weekend, I didn't just prepare for the meeting, I prepared for war. I printed every patent document, every email chain, every recording transcript. I organized them chronologically, created summaries, and built a timeline that would be impossible to dispute. Sunday night, I sat in my apartment reviewing everything one last time. My phone buzzed with a text from Amber. "Hope you're ready for tomorrow's meeting. Harrison's not happy about the client feedback." I stared at the message, then typed back, "I'm ready." Because what Amber didn't know, what Harrison didn't know, was that Monday's meeting wasn't going to be about client complaints. It was going to be about ownership, about theft, and about the woman they'd underestimated finally stepping into the light. I'd spent 4 years being invisible in that company. Tomorrow, they'd see exactly what invisible really looked like. Monday arrived gray and drizzling, Seattle's way of setting the mood for what was about to unfold. I arrived at Pinnacle Dynamics 30 minutes early, not because I was nervous, but because I wanted to watch everyone else arrive. I needed to see their faces before they saw mine. From my desk, I had a clear view of the elevator bank. At 8:47, Amber stepped out wearing a powder blue blazer that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. She walked with the confidence of someone who believed yesterday's presentation had secured her position permanently. At 9:15, Harrison emerged from the executive elevator, phone pressed to his ear, gesturing with his free hand like he was conducting an orchestra only he could hear. He'd built an empire on other people's innovations, and today he looked like a man who'd never questioned whether he deserved it. Neither of them looked toward my corner of the floor. Neither of them saw me watching. At 9:30 sharp, my phone rang. "Conference room Atlas, now," Harrison's assistant said crisply. "Bring your project files." I gathered my materials slowly. Not the trap folder I'd prepared for Amber, but everything else. The patent documents, the employment contract with Section 12.3 highlighted in yellow, the recordings from last Thursday transcribed and time-stamped, and at the very bottom of my bag, a business card I'd printed over the weekend. Natasha L. Winters, patent holder and technology consultant. Conference room Atlas buzzed with tension. 3 department heads sat stiffly around the table, laptops closed, notepads untouched. The CFO, David Chen, looked like he'd been pulled from another meeting mid-sentence, and at the head of the table, Harrison drummed his fingers against the polished surface, while Amber sat to his right, her earlier confidence now replaced with something tighter around her eyes. "We have a problem," Harrison began without preamble. "Last week's client presentations have resulted in complaints, inaccurate data, incomplete analysis, projections that don't align with market realities." He turned toward me. "Natasha, these reports originated from your research. Can you explain the discrepancies?" I opened my folder slowly. The reports Amber presented weren't my final versions. They were preliminary drafts from a shared folder. Amber's face flushed pink. I presented what was available. If the information was incomplete, maybe the research team should have been more thorough. "The research team," I repeated quietly. "That would be me." Harrison leaned forward. "This is exactly what I mean about executive readiness. Real leaders don't pass blame when projects fail." I nodded thoughtfully. "You're absolutely right about leadership accountability." I pulled out the first patent document and placed it on the table. "This is patent US 10847-392, filed 3 years ago for an automated customer relationship management system. It's currently generating approximately $1.8 million in monthly licensing revenue for Pinnacle Dynamics." Harrison glanced at the paper, then back at me. "I'm not sure what point you're trying to make." "The point is that I'm the inventor listed on this patent, and this one, and this one, and these 4. The papers spread across the polished surface like evidence at a crime scene. David Chen reached for one of the patents, his financial brain clearly processing numbers. "These are all registered under N.L. Winters. My maiden name, the name I used when I developed these technologies during graduate school, and my first job at TechFlow Solutions." Harrison's fingers stopped drumming.
When you joined Pinnacle, these patents became company property as part of your employment agreement.
Did they? I pulled out my employment contract, turned to Section 12.3, and read aloud, "In the event of hostile work environment or discriminatory treatment affecting patent holders' ability to perform duties, original intellectual property rights may be subject to legal review and potential reversion." The CFO looked up sharply. "What exactly are you alleging?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I opened my laptop and connected it to the conference room display. "Let me show you what I've documented over the past week." The screen filled with a timeline. Emails where Harrison reassigned my projects to Amber. Meeting recordings where my contributions were dismissed. The presentation from last Thursday where Amber claimed credit for 3 months of my research. "This is from last week's board presentation," I said, playing the audio. Harrison's voice filled the room. "Let Amber handle the presentation. Real executives don't need coaching wheels." I paused the recording. "The woman you called coaching wheels has generated 60% of this company's intellectual property revenue over the past 4 years. Amber tried to interrupt. "This is taken out of context. Harrison was just—" "There's more," I continued, advancing to the next slide. Thursday afternoon, 3:47 p.m. I pressed play on another recording. Harrison's voice again. "The Winters situation is getting complicated. She's been asking questions about her employment contract." Then Amber, "What if she just left? People quit all the time." Harrison, "That would solve several problems." The room was dead silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to hold its breath. Harrison's face had gone from confused to pale to something approaching panic. "Those are private conversations taken without consent. Washington is a one-party consent state. As long as I'm present, recordings are perfectly legal." I clicked to the next slide. "But let's talk about what isn't legal, like using my incomplete research to mislead clients, or systematically reassigning my projects to create the impression that someone else is responsible for innovations they didn't create." David Chen was frantically taking notes. One of the department heads had pulled out his phone, probably texting the legal department. Amber sat frozen, her powder blue blazer now looking more like armor that wasn't working. "There's something else," I continued, advancing to the next slide. Thursday afternoon, 3:47 p.m., I pressed play on another recording. Harrison's voice again. "The Winters situation is getting complicated. She's been asking questions about her employment contract." Then Amber, "What if she just left? People quit all the time." Harrison, "That would solve several problems." The room was dead silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to hold its breath. Harrison's face had gone from confused to pale to something approaching panic. "Those are private conversations taken without consent. Washington is a one-party consent state. As long as I'm present, recordings are perfectly legal." I clicked to the next slide. "But let's talk about what isn't legal, like using my incomplete research to mislead clients, or systematically reassigning my projects to create the impression that someone else is responsible for innovations they didn't create." David Chen was frantically taking notes. One of the department heads had pulled out his phone, probably texting the legal department. Amber sat frozen, her power blue blazer now looking more like armor that wasn't working. "There's something else," I continued, advancing to the next slide. "I've been reviewing the patent licensing agreements Pinnacle signed with external companies. The revenue attribution doesn't match the actual inventor credits." I pulled up a financial spreadsheet. According to these records, Amber Kingsley has been credited as a contributing developer on patents she had no involvement in creating. That's not just ethically questionable, it's securities fraud if investors were given false information about who generates the company's IP value. Harrison stood up abruptly. "This meeting is over. Natasha, I think you should take some time to cool down and reconsider your accusations." "Actually," I said, remaining seated, "this meeting is just beginning." I pulled out the business card I'd printed and placed it in the center of the table. "As of this morning, I've retained legal counsel to review my patent rights and explore potential reversions under Section 12.3 of my employment agreement." The card sat there like a small bomb. Natasha L. Winters, patent holder and technology consultant. I've also filed formal complaints with HR regarding workplace discrimination and with the Patent Office regarding potential misattribution of intellectual property. Harrison's composure finally cracked. "You can't be serious after everything this company has done for you?" "Everything this company has done for me?" I stood up slowly. "Harrison, this company exists because of what I created. You didn't discover my potential when you hired me. You acquired it when you bought TechFlow. I gathered my documents. The coaching wheels you dismissed last week, they've been carrying your entire revenue stream. As I walked toward the door, David Chen called out, "What exactly do you want here, Natasha?" I paused, hand on the door handle. I want what every inventor deserves: recognition, fair compensation, and an environment where I can do my job without being undermined. I looked directly at Harrison. You have 48 hours to propose a resolution. After that, my attorney files for patent reversion and we let the courts decide who really owns what. Amber finally found her voice. "This is insane! You can't just—" "Watch me," I said quietly. The door closed behind me with a soft click, but I could hear the chaos erupting before I'd even reached the elevator. Raised voices, chairs scraping, phones ringing. By the time I got back to my desk, my computer was already pinging with emails. HR wanted to schedule a meeting, legal needed to review my documentation, and Harrison's assistant had sent a calendar invite for Wednesday morning with a subject line that made me smile. Patent discussion, urgent. The woman they'd called coaching wheels had just derailed their entire corporate structure, and they were only beginning to understand how much they had underestimated me. Wednesday morning arrived faster than Harrison probably wanted. I walked into conference room Atlas at exactly 9 a.m. carrying a leather portfolio my attorney Rebecca had insisted I buy. She said, "Image matters in negotiations, especially when you're about to flip a power structure." The room looked different this time. Harrison sat at the head of the table, but his usual commanding presence had been replaced by something tighter, more controlled. Beside him sat two men I'd never seen before, expensive suits, serious expressions, the kind of lawyers who charge by the minute and win by the hour. Amber wasn't there.
"Where's your strategic consultant?" I asked, settling into my chair. Harrison's jaw flexed. "Amber is no longer with the company." I didn't react. I'd learned that information holds more power when you let other people fill the silence. "Ms. Winters," one of the lawyers began, "I'm Thomas Hartwell from Morrison, Pike & Associates. We represent Pinnacle Dynamics in intellectual property matters. We're here to discuss a mutually beneficial resolution to your concerns." "My concerns?" I opened my portfolio slowly. "Mr. Hartwell, I don't have concerns. I have facts." Harrison leaned forward. "Before this goes any further, I want you to know I respect the work you've done here. The patents you developed are valuable, and perhaps we haven't adequately recognized your contributions." I waited. "We're prepared to offer you a substantial raise. Senior Director of Innovation, your own team, stock options that vest immediately instead of waiting 18 months. Thomas Hartwell slid a document across the table. "Salary increase of 180%, full benefits package, and a one-time retention bonus of $750,000. I looked at the offer. The numbers were impressive, life-changing even. 3 years ago, I would have signed immediately and felt grateful for the opportunity. But 3 years ago, I didn't know what I was worth. "This is generous," I said, setting the document aside, "but it doesn't address the fundamental issue." Harrison's eyes narrowed. "Which is?" "You built a billion-dollar company on my intellectual property, then spent 4 years making me feel like I should be grateful for the privilege of working here." I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table. "Before we discuss any offers, I think everyone should hear something." I pressed play. Harrison's voice filled the room. "The Winters situation is getting complicated. She's been asking questions about her employment contract." Then Amber, "What if she just left? People quit all the time." Harrison, "That would solve several problems." The lawyers exchanged glances. Thomas Hartwell cleared his throat. "This conversation was taken without consent. Washington is a one-party consent state. Everything you just heard is perfectly admissible." I pressed play again. Amber's voice, "I could make things more difficult for her. Maybe she'll get the hint." Harrison, "Just don't leave fingerprints." This time, the silence stretched longer. One of the department heads was staring at Harrison like he'd never seen him before. The CFO had gone completely still. "Conspiracy to create a hostile work environment. systematic reassignment of my intellectual contributions, and deliberate sabotage of my professional standing within the company. I pulled out another document. According to my employment contract, any of these conditions triggers a review of patent ownership. All 17 patents I've created are subject to immediate reversion to my personal control. David Chen, the CFO, spoke for the first time. 17 patents generate what percentage of our current revenue? According to last quarter's licensing reports, approximately 61%. The room shifted. These weren't just abstract legal documents anymore. This was math, cold and undeniable. If I pulled my patents, Pinnacle would lose more than half its revenue stream overnight. Thomas Hartwell was furiously typing on his laptop. There may be grounds for renegotiation of the reversion clause. There may be, I agreed, but I'm not interested in renegotiation. Harrison finally spoke, his voice stripped of its usual authority. What do you want? I stood up slowly, the way Harrison had done countless times when he wanted to command attention. For once, it worked. I don't want your company, Harrison. I don't want your title or your corner office or your stock options. I walked around the table, letting them track my movement. For once, I don't want your company, Harrison. I want something much simpler. I stopped behind Harrison's chair. I want you to tell the truth. His head turned slightly. About what? About where your innovations really come from. About the developers you've acquired and discarded. About the pattern of buying small companies specifically for their patents, then minimizing the inventors until they disappear. I pulled out a flash drive and placed it next to his coffee cup. This contains documentation of every acquisition Pinnacle has made in the past 7 years, cross-referenced with patent filings and employment records of the original inventors. 3 of them were laid off within 2 years. 2 quit after being systematically undermined. 1 filed a lawsuit that you settled with an NDA. Thomas Hartwell was no longer typing. He was staring at the flash drive like it might explode. You've built an empire on other people's creativity, and then convinced them they should be grateful for the privilege of working here. I walked back to my seat and sat down. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to establish an innovation recognition program that properly credits and compensates inventors for their contributions. You're going to review every patent acquisition from the past 7 years and ensure original inventors receive appropriate licensing royalties. And you're going to implement policies that prevent the systematic undermining of technical employees. Harrison stared at me. And if we refuse? Then I file for patent reversion tomorrow morning and we let the courts decide who owns what. Given the documented evidence of hostile work environment and the audio recordings of conspiracy to force my resignation, I like my chances. I closed my portfolio. But if you agree to these terms, I'll continue working here. Not as someone grateful for the opportunity, but as a partner who knows exactly what she brings to the table.
3 months later, I walked into my new office on the executive floor. The nameplate read, Natasha L. Winters, Director of Innovation and Patent Development. Through my floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the Seattle skyline stretching toward the horizon. Harrison kept his CEO title, but the company culture had shifted completely. The Innovation Recognition Program was already highlighting forgotten inventors from past acquisitions. 3 former employees had returned with consulting contracts that finally paid them what their patents were worth. And Amber? I heard she was working at a marketing firm in Portland, presenting her own work this time. That afternoon, I got an email from a young developer at a startup called Next Gen Solutions. Ms. Winters, it read, I've been following your story online. My company just got an acquisition offer from a major corporation, and I'm worried about what happens to my patents. Could you review my contract? I smiled and typed back, absolutely. Nobody should have to learn the hard way that their work has value. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying the system that hurt you. Sometimes it's fixing it so it can't hurt anyone else. Harrison Blackstone learned that day that calling someone coaching wheels doesn't make them disappear. It just makes them realize they've been holding up the entire bicycle.
The woman he dismissed as inadequate had been holding his empire together all along. He just needed to be humiliated publicly to finally see it. If this story inspired you, hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to hear that their work has value. Remember, they can underestimate you, but they can't uninvent what you've created. And sometimes, the best way to prove your worth isn't by asking for recognition, it's by showing them what happens when they try to take it away. 2 incredible stories are waiting for you right below. If this one grabbed your attention, these next ones will too. Click to dive in.